Hello, my name is Oswald. Shamod is going to help me with the first demo, which is going to be essentially showing you how to do some CSS 3D graphics animation on an iPad 3 on an Asus Prime ice cream sandwich. And I've already got this out of focus here. Let me see where it is. And so, did anybody go to HTML5 DevConf? Okay, so I did an hour presentation, which I've expanded to 2 hours, and I'm collapsing into 5 minutes. I obviously can't do a whole lot of code. There'll be a little snippet that I'll show you. I'll give you kind of a synopsis of what it does, and there'll be some links for some open source projects. And I'm going to do some CSS shaders, which is requires a special build of Chromium from Adobe, which is available that you can do, but you can't do it on Chrome yet. It's going into the main line soon, I heard. So, starting off with, you got that ready? Oh, he's ahead of me already. Just turn it so everybody, okay, here we go. We're already out of sync, but anyway, that is, mine's not working because I got the wrong one. This is pure CSS3, no JavaScript, no SVG, no canvas. It uses keyframes where you specify the transforms. And in case you don't already know, every linear transformation can be represented by a matrix. And what happens is in a browser, it takes your stuff, whether it's your user-friendly naming convention, rotate, scale, and all that, converts it to a matrix, computes the product, you get one matrix. So, that's done? Perfect. So, thank you. Just to give you a quick idea, I need 6 hands, 3 are not enough. How does this work? Well, let me get this back. I'm not a gadget person, so I kind of, and I'm myopic too. So anyway, it's a case of, just real quick, it's 3 div elements. And there's the animation part that I explained. Then it's linear radial gradients. And the 3 div elements, it's basically doing a skew and then applying the other effects to it. So that other demo was a perfect segue, the previous. And by the way, that's a very nice tool. So now I'm going to show you a few more things that you may not have seen. By the way, the samples that have anything beyond pure CSS3 use Jquery, the CSS method. That's it. So in case, sit back, relax. This is going to be just eye candy. So here's an example of these bouncing rectangles that kind of turn into circles. And that's done by changing using the radius attribute. So it goes from 0 to 50 because it goes through a loop. And then back down, it's kind of like blocks of 50. If it's even or odd, then it's like 0 to 50% and then 50 to 0 to make it a little bit more fluid. Otherwise, it would sort of jump, would be a little bit not so smooth. The idea is very simple. Each one of the div elements is moved by changing the left and the top properties of the upper left corner of each div element. And when you saw the bouncing back and forth, there's a direction. So when it hits one border, horizontal, or the other, you reverse the direction. Similarly, in the vertical, you have a Y direction, and you flip that. That's kind of intuitive, I think. And here's another one, very similar, basically the same idea. So I have an array with a set of div elements, and it did a clone to get the top and the right, and then did the skew effect, create the cubes. I didn't have the linear gradients, but you could add that if you want to. And this one is a little bit more tedious. I mean, it's essentially the same idea, but getting the dots, the front face is no problem, but the top and the right is a little bit tedious to get, but it works. So the 3D effects, the animation, are the same as what you saw in the cube. So I just applied it to those after I rendered them correctly in a static fashion. So moving along. Here's another example, unrelated to this stuff, but this is, as you can see, eye candy, that uses, well, I tried to throw in everything that I could. So there was linear gradients, radial, skew, rotation, scale, perspective, 3D, 2D, just whatever. And I think it runs for a minute or so. And so this is what you watch when you're having a beer or something. That's actually my inspiration when I do this stuff is midnight drinking chilled Chardonnay. That puts me in the zone. You can edit that out if you want. So I'm just trying to fly through this as fast as I can. This one here actually is Jquery Mobile. So it works with mouse and also with tap events on the tablets, which I don't have time to cover. And another example, this is again with Jquery. Now, basically using the same idea, this is all CSS3. And it works on a tablet because I use Jquery Mobile because that gives you the element, the event element, object rather, has the page X and page Y so that when you move these guys here, you can detect where it is and it works kind of smoothly. So essentially, it's the same as the beginning that you saw, the bouncing rectangles, where you detect if there's a collision with the paddles. And if there is, you reverse the direction, obviously. And the vertical, same. If there's no collision with the paddles, then you check if there's a collision with the left or the right. And if there is, you add a point to the other guy. That's it. So using the same code, changing actually 2 lines of code. There I have a circular div 1, and I change the arrays so that I have a set of them like you saw in the beginning, and this is what you get. What did I do? I set text. I set the text. And it was like artificially, it goes through a counter, a loop, so at the end it could actually be tied, right? But it's, all right, so now, same idea, changing 2 lines of code. Now, try to play that game. I think, and I'm not sure if this really works or not, but I think when you have an event, you have multi-touch, for example, you have 2 people. If one person is moving, maybe you know the answer. If somebody's moving this one over here, there's a touch event happening, or a move event. What happens if somebody else moves the other one? I'm not sure if you can detect that. Can you? It's not a quiz, it's just, I would like to know actually. So if you have like, for example, another paddle up here, down here, you have 4 kids playing on a tablet, right? So when one's moving, I'm not really sure if that's possible. You can? Okay, so when you're moving this, like so, and then somebody else touches, you can detect and distinguish from this event. Right, but how do you distinguish between the events happening over here with another touch that happens simultaneously with this move event? Okay, well, good. Glad to know. So this happens to be a polar equation. It happens to be called a conchoid. It doesn't really matter. And it's Jquery, again, the CSS method. And there's an equation, and then you create they're all div elements, and then applying various gradients and transformations. And then, like, I think every 10th one, I use the CSS method to add a CSS3 selector, which does animation. So it'll look, I'll show you. So this is about 240 divs, I think. Not too bad. This is a MacBook, 4 years old, ancient, slow machine. So if you've got a good modern machine, I'm sure it'll go a lot faster. And I think it's like 2 pages of code, or a page and a half. It's very simple. Again, the absolute position is the thing that you need to set for each one of those div elements. If you don't, you'll get a vertical row of black blobs. It will not work. So once you have that in mind, and then applying the different gradients, patterns, and so forth. That's basically it. Yes, sir.
Using position, top, and left.
Yes.
So, is there a reason you're not using a 3D transform on those?
I am applying in some cases, yes, but it's essentially, well, with the bouncing effect, I'm setting that in order to create the impression of animation. Whereas this one, I'm just creating a general swirly thing.
Is the advantage of using Transform 3D?
Yes.
Is you actually tell the device, particularly if it's a mobile device, that it should be hardware accelerated?
Correct.
And then it would run the GPU?
Correct. That is correct. For that purpose, you're correct. But for the actual, yeah, and that's a good point. If you want to sort of force GPU acceleration, you can do a translate 3D 000, which is a kind of like a no-op, do nothing, but it goes up. 3D is involved, so it'll use the GPU. Does that make sense? So if it's available, it'll use it. And if it's not, obviously it won't. So yes. Now, this is the first, can you read that URL? If you go there, I've got 3 or 4 projects, so just click my name down here and you'll see the other ones with the CSS shaders and all that other stuff. So now I want to get to the shaders. This is interesting because it kind of is overlapping now with some of the functionality that's available in WebGL. I don't know that much about it, I'm learning. This is actually 4 div elements applying CSS shaders. So it does this kind of interesting, it's a static effect obviously, but so it's CSS3 with the filter property that's new and specifying a file that is a vertex shader which has C-like code, and I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. I first want to show you the effects. So here's another example. This is going to be slow because of my machine. Oops. Let's see. So this uses opacity, radial gradients, linear gradients, and 4 div elements with CSS shaders. Here's another one, again, using, this is CSS shaders. So effectively what happens is you specify some parameters in the CSS selector, and they get passed over to this, the vertex shader for the CSS shaders, which I'm going to show you. And then the last one, that cube that you saw, you can do stuff like that. There's a very small amount of code. Of course, if you don't understand the code, then that's another story. But there's a bit of a learning curve for some of this shader stuff, which I'm going to show you. Okay, so here's, see, I called it wave. That's the code. So it's WebKit based. Notice that there's the percentages there. It lasts 10 seconds, so it's kind of distributed proportionately. Notice there there's a WebKit filter, obviously WebKit prefixed. You specify the custom URL, and then there's this, I'm going to show you this file here, ABC. These are the attributes that I was talking about that you pass to the CSS shader code. So they happen to be called, nothing special. Amplitude, TXF, or transform, TXF2. So they all have different values. And by the way, this is experimental code, so it may not be fully correct. So here's the shader code. As you can see, notice in line 15, that TXF, that's where you get it. So whatever value you specified in the CSS selector, that's what gets passed here. So an arbitrary number of parameters, whatever you want. Now, the code is in line 35 to 44, and it's this stuff that creates that effect for you, which I don't know why why is this so dark? I'm sorry, you can't really see that. What happened with that's at maximum. Anyway, there's this all this built-in stuff that's kind of not been documented yet. At least I haven't been able to find it, even though I'm talking to a guy, Vincent Hardy at Adobe, who's doing this stuff. There's that TXF2 There's this U projection matrix. It's a built-in thing. It's the only one they have. It does a projection. And then there's the other one. Is that a little better? Oh, okay, good. So the confusion will become clearer now, so to speak. And so this is the thing that computes the coordinates when you do this transformational stuff. And so here you see them multiplying there. So you could have 20 attributes, let's say, in your CSS that you want to send up, and you could do whatever you want to do over there. Now, here's one thing. In CSS, how many minutes do I have left? Because I can talk for hours. Does anybody know how much time? I'm at 10 minutes already? It felt like 30 seconds. Well, let me just say real quick. Matrix in CSS has 6 values. It represents the top 2 rows of a 3x3 matrix, or more for the 4x4 case. But let's look at the 3x3. It doesn't go across 3 and 3. I would have liked the row-oriented approach, but it's columns. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you use the first and the fourth, those are the only non-zero values, that's the scaling effect. So you make it bigger or smaller. If you specify in the first row the third position, that's the shearing effect X, and then the second, that would be shear effect Y. And then the ones on the right, the last 2, that's for translate X and Y. Not too bad, but what about rotations? Well, those are the first 4 elements. The last 2 are 0. So it just so happens that in order to do a rotation, it's cosine of an angle, sine, and then negative sine and cosine. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. So if you take the sine in the top row and move it down to the lower position, it reverses the order. So now you've got to figure out the sine and cosine of values. And you can combine all of these into one matrix. Obviously, it's not intuitive when you want to change that, right? So what happens is in normal CSS land, all of those transformations, as far as I know, get converted to matrices and then multiplied so you have that one. Now, this stuff is fairly intense. I hear the fan going sometimes. I suggested to the Adobe people, take these as test cases to find performance bottlenecks. I hope they do, because some of them are pretty bad. But the point is that you can use, did I show you? Maybe I didn't. Okay, see here, TX, TF. They're here. You see how you have the rotate Y, 75 degrees, rotate 3D, blah, blah, blah. So you can use the user-friendly names as parameter values to specify that you can put in here. So I think that's easier than the first option, right? If that's what you're going to do. So anyway, that's sort of it. 10 minutes. Wow. Any questions? It's here. Right there. So you see where my name is here? If you go here, there's a bunch, there's where it is, CSS shaders graphics. There it is. So I'll just show you. There's animate, 3D, reflect, blah, blah, blah. And there's instructions there for the special Chromium build that you need, because it won't work. And if you want to do WebGL, which does not work in Chrome, at least not on mine, this does WebGL too. And also there's something called Tquery, which is 3JS plus Jquery. Typically in WebGL, you want to do a rectangle, it's like 160 lines of code. It's insane. You can use 3JS, 10. In Tquery, guess how many lines of code that it takes to render a fully 3D torus with animation effects? 1 line of code. That's something to think about. Thanks a lot.